On September 3, 1189, Richard, now known as Richard the Lionheart, was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was a grand spectacle, attended by nobles, clergy, and dignitaries from across the Angevin Empire. However, beneath the celebrations, violence was brewing. At the time of Richard's coronation, England's Jewish community held an important economic role, with many serving as moneylenders due to Christian prohibitions on usury. Despite their contributions to the kingdom's economy, they were often viewed with suspicion and resentment. Richard, unlike some of his predecessors, did not have any particular hostility toward the Jewish population. However, a long-standing climate of religious intolerance, fueled by the upcoming Third Crusade, had created widespread hostility toward non-Christians, particularly Jews. As part of the coronation festivities, representatives from various communities, including prominent Jewish leaders, arrived at Westminster bearing gifts for the new king. However, some of Richard's nobles, possibly misinterpreting his orders or acting on their own prejudices, forcibly denied the Jewish delegation entry into the coronation hall. Rumors quickly spread that Richard had ordered their expulsion, that he had sanctioned violence against them. As tensions rose, a mob formed outside Westminster, targeting Jewish homes and businesses. That night, the violence escalated into full-scale rioting. Jewish homes were stormed, their possessions looted, and many were murdered in the streets. Fires spread through parts of London as mobs set Jewish buildings alight. Some Jews sought refuge in the Tower of London, while others attempted to flee. Richard, upon learning of the riots, was reportedly furious. He had never ordered such violence, and it was a direct challenge to his authority. The king quickly issued royal commands to restore order, and some rioters were punished. However, the damage was already done. In the months that followed, anti-Jewish violence spread to other cities, including York, Norwich, and Lincoln. In March 1190, the worst atrocity took place in York, where the city's Jewish population sought refuge in Clifford's Tower. Surrounded by an armed mob, many chose to commit suicide rather than face torture or forced conversion. Those who surrendered were promised safety, but were instead slaughtered. Despite his personal indifference to the Jews, Richard understood that such violence was dangerous to the stability of his kingdom. Many Jewish lenders had provided financial support to his father's administration, and their deaths meant unpaid debts would be lost. Moreover, lawless riots challenged royal authority. In response, Richard issued strict royal protections for the Jewish communities of England and ordered harsh punishments for further violence. The streets of England were still stained with the horrors of the anti-Jewish riots when Richard turned his focus toward a much grander ambition, the liberation of Jerusalem. In 1187, the great Muslim leader Saladin achieved a decisive victory over the Crusader states at the Battle of Hattin, capturing the True Cross and reclaiming Jerusalem for Islam. The loss of Jerusalem sent shockwaves through Christendom, and the newly elected Pope Gregory VIII issued the papal bull Audita Tremendi, calling upon Christian rulers to reclaim the Holy City. For Richard, who had long dreamed of proving himself on the battlefield, this was the perfect opportunity to cement his legacy. His father Henry II had pledged to join the crusade before his death, and now it was Richard's duty to fulfill that promise. With the throne of England now secured, he began preparations for what would become one of the most famous military campaigns in history, the Third Crusade. At the same time, another powerful ruler answered the call, Philip II of France. Though rivals, Richard and Philip agreed to set aside their differences and embark on the crusade together. Preparing for the crusade was no easy task. War in the Holy Land required an immense army, ships, and supplies, and all of this required an even greater fortune. Richard, never one to shy away from bold action, began ruthlessly selling off royal lands, titles, and offices to the highest bidder. He famously declared, "I would have sold London itself if I could have found a buyer." But Richard's most controversial financial move came from the very people who had just suffered the coronation riots, the Jewish communities of England. Though he had issued royal protections after the massacre, he also seized vast amounts of wealth from Jewish lenders, redirecting it toward his war chest. Meanwhile, Philip II of France was also gathering funds and men for the campaign, though his resources were far more limited than Richard's. Unlike the English king, Philip lacked extensive overseas lands and struggled to raise enough funds for the journey. By the spring of 1190, both kings had assembled their forces. Thousands of knights, soldiers, and supplies were prepared for the long journey. The crusade was finally ready to set sail. By the late summer of 1190, Richard the Lionheart was finally ready to set sail. His vast fleet departed from the shores of England and Normandy. As planned, Richard and Philip of France had agreed to regroup in Messina, Sicily, before continuing their journey together. However, upon arriving in September 1190, Richard found Sicily in turmoil. The island was ruled by Tancred of Lexay, an illegitimate noble who had seized power after the death of King William II of Sicily. This created a personal issue for Richard, as William had been married to Joan of England, Richard's sister. Joan had been treated with great honor during William's reign, but after his death, Tancred had imprisoned her and seized her dowry. Richard saw this as a direct insult to his family and demanded her immediate release. When Tancred refused, Richard took matters into his own hands. On October 4, 1190, Richard led a direct assault on Messina, the key port city of Sicily. His forces overwhelmed the defenders, capturing the city in a day. Tancred, realizing he could not resist Richard's power, quickly surrendered and negotiated a truce. He agreed to release Joan immediately and return her dowry. Philip, who had arrived earlier and made his own agreements with Tancred, was furious at Richard's aggression. The tension between the two kings deepened, but for now they remained allies. With Sicily secured, Richard and Philip spent the winter in Messina. It was during this time that Richard made an important personal decision: his marriage. Since childhood, Richard had been betrothed to Alice of France, Philip's half-sister. However, the marriage had never taken place. Alice had allegedly been Henry II's mistress, making her an unacceptable choice for Richard. Now that he was king, he saw no reason to honor the old betrothal. Instead, Richard had his eyes on another woman, Berengaria of Navarre, the daughter of King Sancho VI of Navarre. This alliance with Navarre would strengthen Richard's hold on Aquitaine, as Navarre bordered his ancestral lands. However, this decision infuriated Philip, who saw it as a direct insult. Knowing that Philip would object, Richard acted in secret. He sent his mother Eleanor of Aquitaine to personally escort Berengaria across Europe. The two women traveled through dangerous lands, crossing the Pyrenees in winter, before reaching Sicily in early 1119. When Philip learned of Richard's plan, he was outraged. He demanded compensation for breaking the engagement with Alice. Richard, eager to avoid direct conflict, agreed to pay Philip 10,000 marks to settle the matter. With this, Philip had no choice but to accept the situation. In April 1191, Richard's fleet finally left Sicily, heading toward the Holy Land. However, as they approached the Mediterranean, a violent storm struck, scattering the fleet and wrecking several ships off the coast of Cyprus. Among them was the vessel carrying Joan and Berengaria. The two noblewomen survived but found themselves stranded on the island, which was ruled by the ambitious and ruthless Isaac Komnenos, a self-declared Byzantine ruler. Rather than offering them safe passage, Isaac took them captive, seeing an opportunity to use them as political leverage. When Richard learned of this betrayal, he was furious. Rather than negotiating, he invaded Cyprus, landing with his forces in May 1191. His army quickly overran the island, defeating Isaac's troops in battle. Within weeks, Cyprus was under Richard's control, and Isaac was captured. With the conquest complete, Richard and Berengaria were married on May 12, 1191, in the city of Limassol. Berengaria was crowned Queen of England, though she would never set foot in England during her lifetime. As Richard the Lionheart celebrated his marriage, a far greater battle was waiting for him. The war that had drawn him from his kingdom, the war against Saladin, was about to begin. By 1187, Saladin had become the undisputed ruler of the Muslim world. Born into a Kurdish noble family, he had risen to power through his tactical brilliance and unwavering faith. Unlike the divided and often feuding Christian rulers, Saladin had united Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, and much of Arabia, forging a vast and powerful empire under the banner of Islam. Now, as Richard set foot in the East, he was not facing a mere warlord. He was going to war against one of the greatest military minds in history. For Richard, This was not just about reclaiming the Holy Land, it was about proving himself as the greatest warrior king of his time. He had conquered Sicily, crushed Cyprus, and defied kings. Now he would stand face to face with the mighty Saladin in a battle that would decide the fate of Jerusalem.